Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Mark Davis was 23 years old, a law student at a small college in Texas, struggling to balance his final year of school with a part-time job. Every day felt like a battle. His father had left him a mountain of debt, and now, with no other choice, he was drowning in bills that he couldn't pay. Mark's clothes were worn out, his shoes scuffed, and the weight of his responsibilities crushed him. He had no choice but to keep pushing forward, no matter how hard it was. One evening, as the rain poured down in the small town, Mark was walking home from a long day of work when his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. His thumb hovered over the screen before he answered. The voice on the other end was calm and smooth, yet oddly authoritative. "Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I'd like to meet with you regarding your financial situation." Mark furrowed his brow. "Sorry, who are you? How do you know about my finances?" She paused before responding, her tone steady, almost amused. "I know enough. Meet me at Brooks Bistro at 7 p.m. It's important." And before Mark could protest, the call ended abruptly. Confused but intrigued, Mark made his way to the bistro. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking him through as he hurried down the street. The warm light of the bistro welcomed him, a sharp contrast to the wet, cold night outside. As he entered, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. He glanced around, spotting a woman sitting alone at a corner table. She was elegantly dressed, her silver hair shining in the dim light, and her presence commanded attention. Eleanor Brooks. He had seen her name in the news, but he didn't expect to be sitting across from her in this moment. "Mr. Davis, I'm glad you could make it," she said, offering him a polite but cool smile as she gestured for him to sit. Mark hesitated but took a seat. He couldn't help but feel nervous in her presence. "You said it was about my financial situation. What is this about?" Eleanor didn't waste any time. She set down her glass of water and looked him directly in the eyes. "I know about the debts you're facing. Your father's legacy, the bills, the mounting pressure. I can offer you a solution." Mark's heart raced. "What kind of solution?" Eleanor's smile was unwavering. "A business arrangement, of sorts. Marry me, Mark." Mark blinked, thinking he'd misheard. "Marry you? What are you talking about?" She leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp. "This isn't about love, Mr. Davis. This is a business deal. I need someone to be my husband, to solidify my legacy and control over my estate. In return, I'll pay off your debts, ensure your future financial security, and give you a life without the constant worry of bills and debt. Think of it as a contract." Mark stared at her, dumbfounded. He had never been approached with such an offer before, especially not from a woman like Eleanor. She was wealthy, powerful, and completely different from anyone he had ever met. But the thought of his debts being wiped out, of having a chance at a better life, made him reconsider. His mind raced, but his pride still held him back. "Why me?" he asked, his voice low. "You don't even know me." Eleanor's eyes softened just slightly. "You're young, unattached, and in desperate need of help. And I don't need love. I just need someone who can help me maintain the appearance of a family. Someone who can be trusted." Mark swallowed hard. It was insane. He didn't know her. He had no connection to her. But the idea of being free from his debts, of finally having some stability, was tempting. "I need time to think about this," Mark replied, his voice shaky. Eleanor nodded calmly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But don't take too long, Mr. Davis. This offer doesn't stand forever. Mark left the bistro that night, his mind in turmoil. He didn't know what to think or what to do. The rain had stopped, but the uncertainty in his heart was just as heavy as it had been when he entered the restaurant. What was he supposed to do? Was this really a chance at salvation, or was he about to make the biggest mistake of his life? To be continued. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Mark Davis was 23 years old, a law student at a small college in Texas, struggling to balance his final year of school with a part-time job. Every day felt like a battle. His father had left him a mountain of debt, and now, with no other choice, he was drowning in bills that he couldn't pay. Mark's clothes were worn out, his shoes scuffed, and the weight of his responsibilities crushed him. He had no choice but to keep pushing forward, no matter how hard it was. One evening, as the rain poured down in the small town, Mark was walking home from a long day of work when his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. His thumb hovered over the screen before he answered. The voice on the other end was calm and smooth, yet oddly authoritative. Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I'd like to meet with you regarding your financial situation. Mark furrowed his brow. Sorry, who are you? How do you know about my finances? She paused before responding, her tone steady, almost amused. I know enough. Meet me at Brooks Bistro at 7:00 p.m. It's important. And before Mark could protest, the call ended abruptly. Confused but intrigued, Mark made his way to the bistro. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking him through as he hurried down the street. The warm light of the bistro welcomed him, a sharp contrast to the wet, cold night outside. As he entered, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. He glanced around, spotting a woman sitting alone at a corner table. She was elegantly dressed, her silver hair shining in the dim light, and her presence commanded attention. Eleanor Brooks. He had seen her name in the news, but he didn't expect to be sitting across from her in this moment. Mr. Davis, I'm glad you could make it, she said, offering him a polite smile, her demeanor calm and businesslike as she gestured for him to sit. Mark hesitated but took a seat. He couldn't help but feel nervous in her presence. You said it was about my financial situation. What is this about? Eleanor didn't waste any time. She set down her glass of water and looked him directly in the eyes. I know about the debts you're facing, your father's legacy, the bills, the mounting pressure. I can offer you a solution. Mark's heart raced. What kind of solution? Eleanor's smile was unwavering. A business arrangement, of sorts. Marry me, Mark. Mark blinked, thinking he'd misheard. Marry you? What are you talking about? She leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp. This isn't about love, Mr. Davis. This is a business deal. I need someone to be my husband, to solidify my legacy and control over my estate. In return, I'll pay off your debts, ensure your future financial security, and give you a life without the constant worry of bills and debt. Think of it as a contract. Mark stared at her, shocked. He had never been approached with such an offer before, especially not from a woman like Eleanor. She was wealthy, powerful, and completely different from anyone he had ever met. But the thought of his debts being wiped out, of finally having some stability, made him reconsider. His mind raced, but his pride still held him back. Why me? He asked, his voice low. You don't even know me. Eleanor's eyes softened just slightly, almost imperceptibly. You're young, unattached, and in desperate need of help. And I don't need love. I just need someone who can help me maintain the appearance of a family. Someone who can be trusted. Mark swallowed hard. It was insane. He didn't know her. He had no connection to her. But the idea of being free from his debts, of finally having some stability, was tempting. "I need time to think about this," Mark replied, his voice shaky. Eleanor nodded calmly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But don't take too long, Mr. Davis. This offer doesn't stand forever." Mark left the bistro that night, his mind in turmoil. He didn't know what to think or what to do. The rain had stopped, but the uncertainty in his heart was just as heavy as it had been when he entered the restaurant. What was he supposed to do? Was this really a chance at salvation, or was he about to make the biggest mistake of his life? To be continued. The next morning, Mark woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. He groggily reached for it, still feeling the weight of Eleanor's offer hanging over him. The message on his screen was simple: "Meet me at the bistro at 1:00 p.m. We need to discuss our next steps." It was from Eleanor. Mark let out a sigh and tossed the phone back onto the nightstand. He stared at the ceiling, his thoughts a whirlwind. The offer seemed too good to be true, but with his finances in ruins, he didn't see much of a choice. His family was depending on him. And with no other options, how could he say no? He got up, threw on some clothes, and made his way to the bistro. The streets were bustling with the midday crowd, but Mark couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his stomach. He had thought long and hard about Eleanor's proposition all night. It was insane. Marry a stranger? But it wasn't just any stranger. She was powerful, wealthy, everything he wasn't. Still, the thought of his mounting debts, of the pressure mounting on his family, kept pulling him back to the idea. The idea of freedom. The idea of security. When he arrived at the bistro, Eleanor was already there, sitting at the same corner table. Her presence was commanding, but there was something about her today. Her poised smile didn't seem as cold, though it still held an air of authority. She waved him over. Mark hesitated for just a moment, then walked over and took a seat across from her. "Good to see you again, Mr. Davis," Eleanor said, her voice smooth, professional as always. "I trust you had time to think over my offer." Mark nodded, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of the tablecloth. "I did," he said, his voice low. "I've been thinking about it all night." He paused, trying to find the right words. "It sounds crazy, but I don't know what else to do. The debts, the pressure, my family. I can't keep going like this." He exhaled sharply, as though releasing the weight of his confession. "But marrying you? I never thought I'd be in this position." "Why me, Eleanor? Why not someone else?" Eleanor's gaze softened, her eyes thoughtful for a moment before she spoke. "You're exactly what I need, Mark. Someone who is not already a part of my world. Someone who can help me maintain the image of a perfect family, without any ulterior motives. You're honest, hardworking, and you have no attachment to my world. This arrangement will benefit both of us. You'll be free from your financial burden, and I'll have someone I can rely on, someone who can stand beside me." Mark's heart was pounding. He looked down at his hands, then back up at Eleanor. "And what do you get out of this? What's your real reason for wanting a marriage of convenience?" For the first time, Eleanor's expression shifted slightly, a hint of vulnerability appearing in her eyes. "I've spent my life building an empire, Mark," she said softly. "I have everything most people could ever dream of: money, power, influence. But at the end of the day, I'm alone. No family, no real connections. I need someone I can trust, someone who won't see me as just a business opportunity. I need someone to stand by me, to make my life whole in a way that money never could." Mark absorbed her words. He could see the loneliness in her eyes, the quiet desperation behind the calm exterior. Maybe it wasn't just about the money for her. Maybe she, too, was struggling with something more. He was starting to understand why she had made this offer. She wasn't just looking for a partner in name only, she was looking for someone to help fill the emptiness inside her life. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the table. All right, Eleanor, he said, his voice steady. I'll do it. I'll marry you. His heart thudded in his chest. He knew it was the only option left, but as he spoke the words, a part of him still couldn't believe he was agreeing to something so ridiculous. A fake marriage. It felt like a dream or maybe a nightmare. Eleanor's expression remained composed, but a glimmer of something more human flickered in her eyes. Thank you, Mark, she said quietly. You don't know how much this means to me. She paused for a moment, then added, we'll need to discuss the details, how this will work in public, the arrangement for your living situation, the legalities. Her voice was back to its businesslike tone, but Mark could see she was trying to maintain her composure. Mark nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. I understand. But, we need to be clear about one thing, he said. This isn't going to be easy. We can't just pretend this is a real marriage. There will be people who will ask questions. He paused, staring at her. Are you sure you're ready for this? Ready to have someone else in your life, even if it's just for show? Eleanor met his gaze, her lips curving into a faint, almost melancholic smile. I've spent so much of my life alone, Mark, she said softly. I'm ready for whatever comes next, even if it's just the beginning of something real, or not. Her voice trailed off as if she wasn't quite sure where the path would lead. Mark looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. All right, he said, his voice firm. Let's do it. He didn't know what he was getting himself into, but he knew it was the only chance he had. And somehow, despite the doubts, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this crazy arrangement would lead to something more. Or maybe it would destroy everything. To be continued. The next few days passed in a blur. Mark found himself back at the bistro with Eleanor, finalizing the details of their arrangement. They had agreed on the terms: a public facade of a perfect marriage, no romantic expectations, and a strict separation of personal lives. Eleanor had already made arrangements for Mark to move into one of her properties, a small but comfortable apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was far from luxurious, but it was enough to give him some breathing room. Eleanor, on the other hand, remained in her grand estate, a world away from his reality. The distance between them was both literal and emotional. Mark settled into his new life, trying to adjust to the strange arrangement. Every day, he followed the routine: going to work, coming home to the apartment, and meeting Eleanor for brief discussions about their public appearances. It was all business, all the time. They would attend galas together, charity events where they were introduced as a happily married couple. The public bought it. They didn't question the lack of affection or the cold professionalism between them. Mark played his part well, keeping his distance, never letting on that beneath the surface, something was beginning to stir inside him. But as the days turned into weeks, Mark found himself wondering about Eleanor. Despite her confident, commanding exterior, there were moments when he saw a flicker of vulnerability. It was during their quiet dinners, when she would speak of her past, how she had built her empire from the ground up, how she had sacrificed so much for her career, yet still felt an emptiness inside. He began to see the cracks in her armor. She wasn't just a powerful businesswoman. She was a woman who longed for connection, for love, for something real. One evening, after a particularly cold gala, Eleanor invited Mark back to her estate for a late-night dinner. They sat at the large dining table, surrounded by opulent decor that seemed to mock the emptiness they both felt. The conversation started off like usual: business, deals, the public's perception of their marriage, but soon, Eleanor fell silent. She picked at her food, her eyes distant, as though lost in thought. Mark watched her, the weight of the silence pressing down on him. He had seen this before. The loneliness. The longing. It was in her eyes, the way she carried herself. Despite the wealth and success, she was just as alone as he had been. He cleared his throat, deciding to break the silence. Eleanor, he said softly, I've been wondering, why did you agree to this? I mean, why me? You didn't have to do this. You could have found someone else, someone who actually wanted to be part of your world. He paused, unsure if he should continue. What's really behind all of this? What do you want from me? She looked up at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, slowly, she placed her fork down, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Her gaze met his, and for the first time, there was no mask. No business facade. I wanted someone to trust, Mark, she said quietly. Someone who wouldn't judge me for my wealth, someone who could see me as a person, not a business opportunity. I've spent my entire life building an empire, but I've never had someone to share it with. I wanted a partner who could be there for me, for what I could give them, but for who I am. But, it's not just that. She hesitated, looking away before continuing. I wanted someone who could fill the empty spaces in my life. A family, even if it's just a pretend one. I guess I thought if I could create the illusion of a family, maybe I could feel a little less alone. Mark listened intently, his heart heavy with empathy. He never expected to hear these words from her. He had always thought of Eleanor as untouchable, a woman who had everything. But now, he was beginning to see the cracks in her armor, the pain, the isolation she had hidden for so long. And it resonated with him. He understood what it was like to feel trapped in a life where nothing seemed to go right, where every decision was a struggle. He reached across the table, his hand hovering for a moment before he placed it gently on hers. You don't have to pretend with me, Eleanor, he said softly. You don't have to hide behind all this. I get it now. You don't need a perfect marriage for the world. You just need someone to stand beside you. Someone who sees you for who you are, not what you have. For a long moment, Eleanor didn't speak. She simply stared at their hands, her fingers trembling slightly under his touch. Then, with a sigh, she finally lifted her gaze to meet his. Thank you, Mark, she whispered. I don't know why, but somehow, I believe you. There was a vulnerability in her voice that he hadn't heard before. It was raw, honest, and for the first time, Mark felt like he was seeing the real Eleanor. In that quiet moment, something shifted between them. What had started as a business arrangement, a lifeline for both of them, was slowly becoming something more. Neither of them could define it yet, but they both knew it was there. The boundaries they had set were starting to blur, and neither was sure where it would lead. But as Mark sat there, holding Eleanor's hand, he knew one thing for certain: this fake marriage was no longer just about survival. It was about something deeper. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something real. To be continued. The weeks that followed were a delicate balance between pretense and something more. Mark and Eleanor continued their public appearances, attending galas, charity events, and business meetings, always presenting themselves as the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, things were slowly shifting. Eleanor's walls were coming down, little by little, and Mark was no longer just the man she had hired for a business arrangement. He was becoming something more. Something she hadn't expected. One evening, after another long day of attending events and meeting business partners, Mark found himself sitting across from Eleanor in her living room. The estate was as grand as ever, but tonight, it felt different. The tension between them was palpable. Eleanor sat with her back straight, as always, but her eyes were softer than before, her gaze not quite so guarded. It was as though she had begun to realize that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement wasn't as temporary as she'd originally thought. You've been quiet lately, Eleanor said, her voice low, almost hesitant. Is everything all right? Mark set his drink down on the coffee table, his mind wandering for a moment before he met her gaze. He wasn't sure how to respond. There was something about her question that made him pause. Was everything all right? He wasn't sure. But he knew one thing for certain: things had started to change. In the beginning, it had been just about surviving, about fulfilling the terms of a contract. But now, it felt like more. Eleanor had slowly started to mean more to him, and the lines between duty and desire were starting to blur. I'm fine, Mark replied, his voice steady, though inside, he felt a swell of emotion he hadn't anticipated. I guess I'm just getting used to this new life. It's a lot, you know? I'm not used to all the attention, all the people looking at us as a perfect couple. He paused, then added, but I'm starting to see things differently. This marriage, it's not just about appearances anymore. It feels like I'm actually starting to care about you. Eleanor's eyes flickered with surprise, and for a moment, she looked away. Mark's words seemed to have caught her off guard. She cleared her throat and took a sip of her wine, her fingers trembling slightly as she set the glass down. She was quiet for a moment before she spoke again. I didn't expect you to say that, she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. I didn't think I would let anyone in. I've kept people at a distance for so long, Mark. I never thought I'd feel this way. I've built this life of perfection, but it's been empty. She paused, her gaze dropping to her hands in her lap. I've spent so many years alone, and I convinced myself that I didn't need anyone. But when you said that, her voice trailed off. Mark felt his heart tighten at the vulnerability in her words. Eleanor, the powerful businesswoman, the one who had everything, wealth, success, status, was still the same person underneath all of that. She was lonely. She was scared. Just like him. They were both searching for something real, something that went beyond the surface. He reached across the table and placed his hand gently on hers. You don't have to be alone anymore, Eleanor, he said softly. I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time in a long while, Eleanor didn't pull away. She looked up at him, her eyes full of emotion, something raw and unguarded. There was no more pretense. No more masks. They were two people, sharing a moment of honesty and connection. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the house and the soft ticking of a clock in the background. Mark could feel the tension slowly melting away, replaced by something deeper, something neither of them had expected. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like they were both on the same path. Not just as business partners, but as people who were beginning to understand each other in ways they hadn't before. After a moment, Eleanor finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I never thought I'd find this with you, she said, her words heavy with meaning. I thought I was just doing what I had to do to protect myself. But now, I'm starting to believe that maybe this could be real. Maybe we could be real. Mark smiled softly, his heart swelling with something he couldn't quite name. I think we can be, he said quietly. And for the first time, Eleanor's smile reached her eyes. It wasn't the calculated smile of a businesswoman, but the warm, genuine smile of someone who had found something she hadn't known she was looking for. As they sat there together, the weight of their unspoken connection hanging in the air, neither of them knew what the future held. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had found something real, something that neither of them had expected when they first entered into their arrangement. And whatever came next, they would face it together. To be continued. As the days turned into weeks, Mark and Eleanor's arrangement continued, but something was different now. The walls between them had started to crumble, and what was once a business arrangement began to feel like something more. They still attended public events together, still played the role of the perfect couple for the world to see, but behind closed doors, the lines between what was real and what was fake were starting to blur. Mark had found himself growing closer to Eleanor in ways he hadn't expected. They shared quiet moments together, moments that weren't for anyone else but them. There were times when she would let her guard down, moments when she spoke about her past, about the loneliness that had driven her to build the empire she now ruled. And in those moments, Mark saw a side of her that no one else had ever seen. He realized that she wasn't just the powerful CEO who ran a multi-billion-dollar company. She was a woman who had fought for everything she had and still felt the emptiness of having no one to share it with. One night, after another lavish gala, Eleanor invited Mark back to her estate. They had spent the evening mingling with high-profile guests, smiling and posing for photos, maintaining the illusion of a perfect couple. But when they returned to her home, it was just the two of them. Eleanor had changed out of her gown and was now wearing a simple robe, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked so different, vulnerable in a way that Mark hadn't seen before. She looked human. I'm glad we're finally alone, Eleanor said softly, walking over to the sofa and sitting down. Her tone was gentle, almost hesitant. Mark followed her, sitting beside her. There was an air of quiet understanding between them, a silence that didn't feel awkward, but comforting. I know, Mark replied, his voice quiet. It's been a crazy few weeks, hasn't it? It's hard to remember what's real sometimes. He looked at her, trying to gauge her reaction. But I think we're starting to figure this out. I'm starting to figure you out. For a moment, Eleanor didn't speak. She looked at him with an unreadable expression, her eyes flickering with something Mark couldn't quite place. Then, slowly, she took a deep breath and nodded. I never thought I'd say this, but you're right, she admitted. This whole thing was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, something I thought would fill the void in my life. But now, it feels like we've built something more. Something I never expected. She paused, her gaze softening. I thought I could control everything. My business, my life, my image. But you've changed the way I see things, Mark. You've shown me that maybe I don't have to be in control all the time. Mark's heart swelled as he heard her words. He had always known that Eleanor was more than just her powerful exterior, but hearing her admit it made him realize just how deep their connection had become. She was still the strong, independent woman she had always been, but now, there was a warmth to her that he had never seen before. He reached out, taking her hand in his. You don't have to be in control all the time, Eleanor, he said softly. You're allowed to let go. You're allowed to feel. He squeezed her hand gently. And I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time, Eleanor's eyes filled with emotion. She looked down at their intertwined hands, then back up at Mark. A tear slid down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away, as if embarrassed by her vulnerability. I've spent so many years trying to be strong, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I've built everything I have by myself. But I can't keep doing it alone. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay, when I'm not. She sniffed, her breath shaky. I think I'm starting to care about you, Mark. Mark's heart raced at her words. He had known it for a while, but hearing her finally say it made everything feel real. He had started to care about her too, more than he ever expected. But this wasn't just about a business arrangement anymore. It was about two people who had found something real in each other, despite the chaos of their lives. Eleanor, he whispered, leaning closer. I care about you too. More than I thought I would. He paused for a moment, looking into her eyes. We've already come so far, and I don't want to stop now. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and something softer, something hopeful. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Eleanor leaned in, resting her forehead against his. Maybe this isn't what we planned, she said quietly, but I think we're finding something better. Mark smiled softly, his heart full. He had no idea where this would lead, but in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. They had started something real. And whatever came next, they would face it together. To be continued. The following days were filled with a new sense of ease between Mark and Eleanor. They had started to live their lives more openly, without the constant need to maintain the facade they had once held so tightly. The boundaries they had set for their marriage, strictly business, had begun to shift, and with each passing day, they found themselves talking more, sharing more. Mark was no longer just the man Eleanor had hired to play a part in her world. He had become a part of her world in ways neither of them had expected. It was an early Saturday morning when Eleanor called Mark, her voice slightly strained on the phone. Mark, she said, her tone more serious than usual. I need to talk to you about something. Mark paused, sensing the change in her voice. He arrived at her estate an hour later, the morning sun casting long shadows over the manicured lawns. Eleanor was waiting for him in the sitting room, her face serious but her eyes guarded. As soon as he entered, she motioned for him to sit, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What's going on, Eleanor?" Mark asked, his voice soft. He had become attuned to the subtle shifts in her demeanor, and something about her today made him uneasy. Eleanor looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Mark, I've been thinking about yous about everything. I know we agreed this would be just a business arrangement, but I can't help how I feel. This thing between yous, it's not just some arrangement anymore. I think I'm falling for you." She said the words so quietly, but there was no mistaking the sincerity in her voice. Mark's heart skipped a beat, a mixture of emotions rushing through him. He had always tried to guard his feelings, afraid of what might happen if he let them in. But hearing Eleanor admit this, it made everything so much more real. He had started to feel the same way, but he had never been brave enough to say it out loud. He reached across the table, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently touched hers. "Eleanor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been feeling the same way. I've been trying to fight it, trying to keep this all just about the contract, but I can't. I care about you. I really do." For a moment, Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, her defenses completely breaking down. "I didn't think I could feel like this again," she admitted. "I've spent so much of my life building walls around myself. I thought that if I had everything, money, power, success, that I'd be happy. But I was wrong. I was just alone." She looked at him, her voice cracking, "And then you came into my life, and you changed everything." Mark's heart ached as he listened to her words. He had never seen her this vulnerable, and it made him realize just how much she had been holding back. The powerful, unshakable woman he had admired for so long was just like him, someone who had built walls to protect themselves from the pain of loneliness. But now, those walls were coming down. He took her hand in his thumb gently brushing over her knuckles. "Eleanor," he said softly, "you don't have to do this alone anymore. You have me. I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, the room was filled with an almost palpable silence, the weight of their emotions hanging in the air. Eleanor's gaze softened, and she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. The years of guardedness, the years of pretending, had all led to this moment, a moment where they were no longer hiding behind walls, no longer pretending. "I want to believe that, Mark," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. "I want to believe that this is real, that we can make it work. But I'm scared. I've never let anyone in this far before." Mark smiled softly, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "I'm scared too, Eleanor. But we're in this together. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. And that's real. We don't have to pretend anymore." Eleanor nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. Mark gently wiped it away, his hand lingering on her cheek for a moment before he cupped her face in his hands. It wasn't the start of a perfect story. They knew that. But it was a beginning. A real beginning. And so, as they sat together in the quiet of the room, they both knew that the path ahead would be uncertain, full of challenges and fears. But for the first time in a long time, they were willing to face it, not as strangers pretending to be a couple, but as two people who had found something worth fighting for. To be continued. The weeks that followed felt like a dream and a nightmare all at once. Mark and Eleanor's relationship had evolved beyond what either of them had anticipated. What had begun as a business arrangement, a contract, had slowly turned into something real, something that neither of them could ignore. They had shared moments of intimacy, of honesty, of real connection, and yet, despite the growing feelings between them, there was still a lingering sense of fear. They were both afraid of what this could mean, afraid of letting their guard down completely. It was a cold evening when the tension between them finally came to a head. Mark had been staying at Eleanor's estate for a few days now. It was his first time truly living in her world, and it felt both overwhelming and comforting at the same time. The large, grand halls and the luxuries surrounding him were stark contrasts to his modest life. But in the quiet moments, when it was just the two of them, those differences seemed to fade away. Eleanor had invited him to a private dinner at her home that evening, and as they sat at the long, elegant table, the weight of everything between them hung in the air. Mark had noticed something different in Eleanor that night. She was quieter than usual, distant in a way that he had never seen before. She picked at her food, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Mark had learned to read her, could tell when something was wrong, even when she tried to hide it. He set his fork down and looked at her, his brow furrowed. "Eleanor, what's going on? You've been off all evening. If something's bothering you, we need to talk about it," Mark said, his voice calm but firm. Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes a mixture of frustration and sadness. She put her fork down and sighed heavily. "Mark, I've been thinking about us, about everything. I thought I could do this, that we could keep going with this arrangement. But the truth is, I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending this is all just a contract." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm starting to care about you in a way I didn't expect. And that scares me. It scares me because I'm afraid of losing control of everything again. I've spent my whole life keeping things in check, making sure nothing gets out of hand. But now, I'm afraid that if I let myself feel too much, I'll lose everything I've worked for." Mark sat in silence for a moment, letting her words sink in. He could see the struggle in her eyes, the internal battle she was fighting. He had seen the same struggle in himself. They were both terrified of the same thing, losing control. He reached across the table and gently took her hand in his. "Eleanor, I know this is hard. I know you've built a life that's all about control, but you don't have to be afraid of losing it. You don't have to hide from your feelings. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We don't have to keep pretending. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. And that's not something I'm going to walk away from," he said softly. For the first time that evening, Eleanor's expression softened. She looked at their intertwined hands, her thumb gently rubbing the back of his. Her lips trembled as she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so many years building walls, Mark. I didn't think I could ever let someone in, not like this. But now, I'm starting to believe that maybe I can trust you. Maybe we can make this work. But I need to know that we're in this together. That you won't walk away when it gets hard." Mark squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with a sense of certainty that he hadn't felt before. "I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor. I've already made up my mind. We've come too far to back out now. We don't have to have all the answers. But we'll figure it out. Together." There was a long pause, the air between them thick with unspoken words. Eleanor stared at him for a moment, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Then, slowly, she nodded. The walls around her heart, the ones she had spent so long building, began to crumble. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice steadying. "We'll do this. No more pretending." Mark smiled, the weight of their conversation finally lifting. It wasn't going to be easy. They both knew that. But in that moment, it felt like the beginning of something real. They had both taken a leap of faith, and there was no turning back now. To be continued. Days passed, and Mark and Eleanor continued to navigate the delicate balance between their public image and their growing connection. They spent more time together outside the events and the spotlight, learning more about each other with every passing day. Eleanor had become someone Mark could open up to, someone who understood the complexities of his past and his struggles. In return, Mark had become a steady presence for her, a source of comfort in a life that had always been about control, power, and appearances. They had started to lean on each other, not just for the roles they played in the public eye, but for the raw, unspoken truths they were discovering together. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Eleanor's estate, the warm summer breeze lightly brushing against their skin, Eleanor turned to Mark, her face soft with a mixture of emotion and contemplation. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Eleanor began, her voice quiet, yet steady. "About how much has changed since we first met. How different everything feels now." She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I never thought I could trust anyone this much, but you've shown me something I didn't even know I needed. You've shown me that I don't have to carry the weight of everything alone. And that scares me. She met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for a reaction. Mark's heart tightened as he heard her words. He knew exactly what she meant. The connection they had built over time, the bond they were forming, was something neither of them had anticipated. And it was only getting stronger. I understand, Mark replied, his voice calm and sincere. I'm scared too, Eleanor. But I've learned that sometimes, the things that scare us the most are the things worth fighting for. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you, for us. He smiled softly, his eyes meeting hers with unwavering certainty. We've already come so far, and we're not backing down now. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his thumb brushing over her fingers. Eleanor's eyes softened, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe him. To believe that what they had wasn't just another passing moment, another fleeting connection. It was something real. Something worth holding on to. She squeezed his hand, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I want to believe that, she whispered. I really do. She let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing as the tension that had been building inside her for so long began to ease. But it's hard for me to let go, Mark. To let go of all the control I've had over my life. To let someone else in, fully. She hesitated for a moment, as though searching for the right words. I'm afraid that if I let go too much, I'll lose everything. The life I've built, the empire I've worked so hard for, everything. Mark leaned in closer, his voice soft yet steady. You won't lose anything, Eleanor. Not as long as we're in this together. You're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry all the weight by yourself. We'll face whatever comes next side by side. And we'll make it work. I promise. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with vulnerability and hope, and in that moment, she realized he was right. She had spent so many years building walls to protect herself, to guard her heart, but with Mark, she was starting to see that maybe she didn't need to protect herself anymore. Maybe it was okay, to let go, to trust, and to let someone else share in the weight of it all. She leaned in, closing the distance between them, and for the first time, their kiss wasn't about pretending or putting on a show. It wasn't about appearances or maintaining a perfect image for the world to see. It was about something real, something that neither of them had expected, but both of them had come to realize was worth fighting for. As they pulled away from each other, their foreheads resting together, Eleanor whispered softly, maybe we don't have all the answers yet, Mark. But I'm willing to find out what comes next, with you. Mark smiled, his heart full of a promise he had made to himself to never let go, to never walk away. They had started this journey together, and no matter what happened next, they would face it side by side. To be continued. Months passed, and the life Mark and Eleanor had built together felt more real with each passing day. The walls that once separated them, the ones they had both carefully constructed to protect themselves, had finally crumbled. They had stopped pretending to be just a business arrangement and had begun to live as partners. Their connection was no longer about appearances, it was about a bond that had grown from shared vulnerability, trust, and love. But despite their closeness, there were still moments when both of them wondered if they were truly ready to let go of everything they had built and embrace the future together. One day, Eleanor called Mark and asked him to meet her at a small cafe near the estate. It was a quiet spot they had visited once before, when their arrangement was still new and uncertain. As he walked into the cafe, Mark saw Eleanor sitting by the window, her back to him. She was gazing out at the street, lost in thought. When she heard him approach, she turned and smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made his heart skip a beat. Hi, Mark said, his voice warm. What's going on? You seemed serious on the phone. He sat across from her, his gaze softening as he took in the look on her face. There was something different about her today, something more reflective. Eleanor took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. Mark, I've been thinking, she began, her voice steady but with a hint of nervousness. About everything. About us. We've come so far from where we started, and I think I'm ready to take the next step. I've spent so many years building walls, trying to protect myself, but I don't need to do that anymore. Not with you. I trust you. She paused, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I want this. I want us. I want to build something real together, not just a partnership or a facade, but a future. A life. A family. But I need to know that you want the same thing. That you're ready to take that leap with me. Mark's heart raced as he listened to her words. Eleanor, the woman who had always been in control, the woman who had guarded her heart so fiercely, was asking him to take a leap of faith with her. It was everything he had ever wanted but never thought possible. He had come to love her in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't just the powerful CEO he had once admired from afar, she was the woman he had come to know, to care for, and to build a life with. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers, and he smiled. Eleanor, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I don't need anything more than this. I've been with you every step of the way, and I'll keep standing by your side. I'm ready to take that leap with you. To build a real future. Together. His voice was steady, his heart full. Eleanor's eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she allowed herself to believe in something beyond her carefully constructed empire. She had spent so long focusing on her career, on building a life that was flawless in the eyes of the world, but now she realized that the true measure of a life wasn't about perfection, it was about connection, love, and trust. And she had found that in Mark. I love you, Mark, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. I'm ready to start our future. She leaned forward, her lips brushing his in a gentle kiss, a kiss that spoke of everything they had been through and everything they were about to build. As they pulled away, their foreheads resting together, Mark and Eleanor knew that their journey wasn't over. It had just begun. They had taken the leap, together, and now, nothing could stop them. They weren't just playing roles anymore. They had found something real, something worth holding on to. And they would face whatever came next as partners, as equals, and as the family they had always wanted. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, they didn't need all the answers. All they needed was each other. And that, they knew, was enough. To be continued.